Hi. Okay, so we are getting ready to do, in my estimation, this is one of the harder parts of a sock, and you really have to focus when you're doing this part. We've already done our cuff. We've done a 1/2 inch of nothing but stockinette to get ready. We've done our heel flap. And because I'm using a bigger yarn, I only had 9 turns. So that meant I knit and purled 9 times. So that includes all of this, the purple. And now we're getting ready to do the green. And the green is what we call turning the heel. This is the heel flap, and this is turning the heel. So I'm going to give you some formulas, because depending on your, depending on the sock, how many stitches you've cast on, you will turn the heel this way with different numbers. So let's talk about that for just a little bit. Ooh, I have kind of a mess. There we go. Okay, when I cast on 48 stitches. Now, for this pattern, you could cast on 40, 48, or 56. And some patterns we cast on 64. Especially when I'm doing sock yarn, I will cast on 64. So we are using half of our stitches. So if you've done 40, half of your stitches would be 20 on one needle, on your back needle, where we're going to do our heel flap, or our heel, turning our heel. I have 48, so half of that is 24. If you have 56, half of that is 28. And when I do sock yarn, half of that is 32. So I'm not going to talk about this one right now. This is the formula for when you're turning your heel. And you can write this down. It consists of 2 rows, just like when we did our heel flap. Turning the heel consists of 2 rows that we repeat. So the first one, we're going to slip 1, knit, and we'll discuss what this number is. We'll knit that many, then we'll knit 2 together, then we'll knit 1. And on our return row, we will slip 1, purl 5, purl 2 together, and purl 1. Okay, so let's figure out how we figure that number here for our first row of turning. And it's not that hard, it's just that you have to kind of think what you're doing. So if you have cast on, let's say 48, I'm working with 48. I've cast on 48 total. Half of that on my back needle is 24. And so when I'm doing this, I want to consider half of that plus 1. So half of that is 12, plus 1 is 13. So for me, that number will be 13. Let's do the 20. If you cast on 20, half of your stitches on the back is 20 stitches. Half of that is 10 plus 1 is 11. So if you've cast on 40 stitches total, that number will be 11. Okay, if you cast on 56, half of the stitches are on the back, which is 28 stitches. Half of those stitches is 14, plus 1 is 15, so that number will be 15. So let's go ahead and work our first row. And I'm doing double points. So we're going to slip 1 stitch. I'm going to knit 13 stitches. 1, 2, 3, and we're going slow, quite slowly for those of you who have never done socks. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay, so then I'm going to knit 2 together, and I have to twist my stitches because my stitches were on the needle. So I'm going to knit 2 together, and then I'm going to knit 1. For now, we're going to ignore 2, 4, 6, 7 stitches. Yours may be 5, yours may be 9, but you will have the same number of stitches on this side that you do on this side when we turn and purl. So this first row is actually the setup row, and I'll show you why. So the next row we're going to turn, we're going to purl. We're going to slip 1, and I am going to purl 5. Actually, I'm going to purl 7. Nope, I'm going to purl 5. Sorry, I'm trying to think too many things. So I'm going to purl 5. Everybody purls 5. So let's go ahead and do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I want to purl 2 together, and then I want to purl 1. So I should have 7, 2, 4, 6, 7. 7 on each side. And if you pull these apart a little bit, you can see you have a little gap. That's what you want. So we're going to turn this again. And now what we're going to do is we're going to slip our first one. And instead of 5, we're going to knit 6. And you're going to add 1 to each row that we do. So we're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, if you lose count of what you're doing on this part, you can always check, because you're going to have a space between your last stitch and the first stitch to your left. So on this one, we actually want to knit these 2 together. And because I purl, I slip mine. You may not have to do that. I'm going to knit those 2 together. Okay. And then I'm going to knit 1. So again, we're going to have less stitches on our left-hand needle, but we are going to have our gap. So we're going to turn it, and I have a little bit of a mess. Let me try and get this mess cleaned up here. There we go. Okay, so I've turned it. I'm going to slip. And basically, instead of me remembering now I have to do 7, I remember to knit to 1 before my space. So I will knit and leave 1 before my space. So let's go ahead and, purl actually. Purl, 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 purl. Okay, that's my last one. And I have 1 before my space. And you can see it is a bigger space. Then I'm going to go ahead and purl these 2 together, and then purl 1 at the end. And you can see I have 5 on this side now. So we'll turn it. And again, we're going to do the same thing. You can see we have a space here. We're going to knit and leave 1 on the right-hand side of that space. So we're going to slip 1, and then we're going to knit. And this should be probably 8, I think, if you're keeping track. It's just easier not to have to remember a bunch of numbers. It's just easier to remember that we leave 1 on our needle before that big space. And then these last 2 stitches, hold on, let me get them turned. I don't want to mix up. So I have a space there. I'm going to knit these 2, this one before the space and this one after the space, knit those 2 together, and knit 1. And so now I have 3 on this side. We're going to turn, and we're going to purl. Now, be aware of where your space is. I'm going to slip 1, and I'm going to purl what you're doing is you're doing a form of short rows. Okay, so I have 1 before that big gap, and I have 1 after that. I'm going to go ahead and purl those 2 together, and then always remember to purl your 1, and I should have 3 stitches left. Turn it, and let's do it again. Slip 1, knit to 1 before our space, you can see it's already starting to curl up, which is what we want. I have 2 more to knit. Okay, and there's my space. There's 1 on the right hand side of the space, 1 on the left hand side. I'm going to go ahead and I want to knit those 2 together and then knit 1. So I only have 1 on this side now. So I'm going to turn and do the same thing. I'm going to slip and then purl, and it's taking us longer to purl back. If you remember the formulas for this, half of half plus 1, you can do any size sock that you want. You can cast on 100 stitches in lace if you want, and you'll know what you're doing. Okay, so there's my big gap. I'm going to purl these 2 together and purl 1. And again, I have 1 on each side that's by themselves. I'm going to turn and do this again. And you can see you're getting a nice heel turn right there. Let's see, there you go. Okay, so we slip 1. We knit to our 1 before our space, which we are going to be finished on this side. And we're almost there. Yay! Okay, so I have 1 before my space and 1 after. I'm going to go ahead and knit those 2 together. And then we're going to purl back to the other side. And we will have turned our heel. So I'm going to slip and purl. Just remember, you have a formula. Half of your total stitches that you've cast on, half of them will be in the back for the heel, and half of them will be in the front for the front of your sock. So we take those half of the total that you've cast on, we half them again, and then we add 1. So if you have your formula, so I've purled those last 2 stitches together. And you can see I have my heel cup. So this is all you really need to remember. slip 1, and then knit half of your half plus 1, knit 2 together, knit 1, and then slip 1, purl 5. This is the only real number you need to remember in this situation. The 13 you will figure out from how many you've cast on, and the 5 is just a given. And then this is pretty much it. And then remember that you only knit to right before your space. So next time we're going to go ahead and we will start picking up stitches, and I will show you how to do that. We'll have to knit across here first, and then we will pick up stitches on both sides. And you can see that's going to be where your foot's going to come out, right there. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this. Next time, join me and we'll go ahead and pick up stitches, and I'll show you how easy it's going to be since we have slipped that first stitch. Okay, I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye. Hi, okay, so we're getting ready to go ahead and turn our heel, but let's talk about a little bit of a few things before we do that. We have already finished our ribbing, sorry, and we've added a 1/2 inch of just stockinette stitch below our ribbing. You should have your purple part, the heel flap, finished. And so we're getting ready to do the green part, and this is the turning the heel part. This is a little tricky. It's actually the trickiest part of doing socks, and if you know the formula, you'll be just fine. So I'm going to show you the formula, and make sure that you have some time set aside where no one's going to bother you, and you can just focus on doing this part. Okay, so let me get my, and we're doing circulars right now, so let me get my sock so far, and we'll talk about the different pieces of your sock. So you might want to write this formula down, because this will work for any sock that you decide to do, whether you cast on 40 stitches, 64, 72, 84, whatever, however many you cast on, this will work for any sock. So if you memorize this, or just keep this in a little notebook for yourself and understand how to use the pattern, you'll be fine. So this is just for the turning the heel part, and we're going to talk a little bit more. There's another part to this that you'll need to know. So when you look at your sock, I have cast on 48 stitches. You can cast on, for this pattern, we could cast on 40, 48, or 56. When I do sock yarn to make socks, I generally cast on 64. So I'll show you how you can figure this. So I have cast on 48. When you're working with your sock, you have half of those stitches on the front, because this will become your the top of your sock that goes out on the top of your sock. This is your heel flap, and we're going to turn our heel right here on these half stitches. So you have half on the front and half on the back. So taking these half stitches that you have on the back, in order to figure out what this star number is, knit how many this is, you have to know that I have, for example, I have 24 stitches. If you've cast on 40, you should only have 20 stitches on your heel flap. And if you did 56, you should have 28 stitches on your heel flap. So the next part of that formula is we're only dealing with the half of the stitches that are on the back, which is either 20, 24, or 28. Mine is 24, so I'm going to show you how I do mine. In order to know the first part of this, you have to take half plus 1. So half of 24 is 12, plus 1 is 13. So the number that I'm going to put into this is 13 for this pair of socks. Now let's figure the rest out for the rest of you. If you've cast on 40, half of your socks on the back are 20 stitches. Half of that is 10 plus 1 equals 11. So you would plug 11 into where the star is. If you've done 56, half of your stitches on the back are 28. Half of those 28 is 14, plus 1 is 15. You would go ahead and plug in 15 to where that star is. Okay? So let's go ahead and do the first row of turning our heel. So in order to do that, I slip one. Let me pull that down a little bit so you can see it a little better. So I slip one. Now remember, my stitches are backwards, so when I come to knitting two together, I'm going to turn them. So don't let that confuse you. So I've slipped one. I'm going to knit 13. You knit however many you had to plug in for that number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay, now I'm going to twist these next two stitches because I need to knit them together, and I can't knit them the way they were laying on my needles. So after I've knit my 13 single stitches, I'm going to knit two together. There, I've knit those two together, and I'm going to knit one. So when you look at this, you will see that I'm going to have a gap between that last stitch that I knit and the rest of the stitches on my needle. So I have 2, 4, 6, 7. If you've cast on fewer or more stitches, you'll have either 5 or 9 stitches for the number of stitches you've cast on. So I'm going to turn this, and I'm going to do the second row. I'm going to slip one. And this is stagnant for this second row of our pattern. I'm going to knit 5, 1, 2, or purl, I'm sorry, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to purl 2 together, and then I will purl 1. And I should have 2, 4, 6, 7 stitches left on my left-hand needle. Perfect. Let's turn it. Now, if you like numbers better than a formula, you will have to remember that the next one is a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on. But it's just easier to remember the formula because then you don't have to worry about losing track. So when I look at the stitches on my needle, you'll see these are the stitches that I worked, the last 2 rows. There is a gap between that last stitch that I worked and the 7 that I didn't work. Remember that gap. Each time we flip or to knit and purl, we're going to have a gap. So we want to, this side we're knitting, so we want to knit 1 stitch before that gap. We want to leave one of these stitches on our needle. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to slip 1. And we're going to knit, and I don't know how many, it's probably 7, but I don't keep track of the numbers on this. There's so many places in knitting that we have to keep track of numbers. So this is just a formula, and it works with, it doesn't matter how many stitches you've cast on, this formula will work. So I am to the last stitch, and I'm going to twist those stitches. There we go. And I am going to knit those 2 stitches together, and then I will knit the next stitch on my left needle. Now I should have 5, 2, 4, 5. Okay. Let's turn it, and let's follow the same pattern. Slip one, purl to one stitch before our gap. There we go. And so I have one stitch before my gap, and there's my gap, and then one stitch. I'm going to purl those two stitches across that gap together, and then purl one. So I should have 5, 2, 4, 5 on my left-hand needle. Flip it again, and we will just continue that way. Always watch for your gap, because the two stitches across the gap get knit together. So we're going to slip one and then knit two, one before our gap. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and you can see each number is bigger. There are my two stitches. Let me flip this one around. Okay, there we go. I'm going to knit those two stitches together. Oops, I split a stitch. And then we just knit one. So let's turn it again and do the same thing on the purl side. Slip one stitch, purl to one stitch before our gap. What did I do there? Oh. I'll be back. I made a mistake. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm turning. I have 3 on each side, 5 on one side and 3 on the other. I slipped one. I'm going to purl to one stitch before my gap. And once I get to that stitch, then those two stitches get knit together. Where the gap is, you close that gap by knitting those two stitches together, or purling, and then we're going to purl one. So I should have 3 stitches left on this needle, 3 on each needle past the gaps. Okay, turn it again and do it again. Slip, knit, and we are almost finished with turning our heel. It's not as hard as some people have made it out to be on the internet or even in books, but it is something you have to pay attention to. So I'm going to go ahead and knit those 2 stitches across that gap together, knit 1 stitch, and then you should have 1 stitch on your needle left. So I'm going to turn, and I'm going to purl back to the other side, slip one, purl back to the split. If you remember the formula makes turning the heel a lot easier than trying to keep track of, oh, do I knit back 6 or do I knit back 5? I just knit back to 1 stitch before my gap. That's all I have to remember. Okay, so I'm going to purl these 2 together and purl 1 afterwards. So I should have 1 stitch left. Very good. So we're just going to go ahead and finish up these last 2 rows. And we slip one and then we knit to our gap, 1 before our gap. Once we get to our gap, we go ahead and close up that gap by knitting those last 2 stitches. And you can see, there's my gap. We're going to knit those last 2 stitches together, and we're finished on that side. So all we have to do is knit back, and I have to straighten out my needle. Knit back, or purl back, so I'm going to slip and then purl the whole way back to that next gap, 1 before the gap, A lot of people like the heel flap. It is a nice way to finish your sock at the heel. I have found several other heels that work just as well, and actually my favorite is called the Fish Lips Kiss. And the Fish Lips Kiss is this, and this is a DK, so it's a little bit bulky, but you get a very perfect heel fit, and you don't get the slouchy. Sometimes when you wear your socks, the heel flap will start to slouch, and it doesn't do that with the Fish Lips Kiss. Okay, these are my 2 last stitches. I'm going to go ahead and purl those together, and we have turned our heel. So let's take a look at that. So far you have this for your sock, and this is where your foot will come out, and we are going to, next time we will learn how to pick up the stitches, and you will see how easy it is because we've slipped that first stitch. We won't pick up too many or too few, so that's going to be perfect. I hope this has helped you. I hope the formulas for turning your heel have been very helpful. Then you don't have to memorize how many stitches to knit in between your turnings. So keep this in a little notebook for yourself, and you'll just be crazy about knitting socks. Okay, I'll see you next time, where we will pick up our stitches and then we will start working in the round again. All right, talk to you next time. Bye-bye.